right after we buried my father. No coat, no money, just the rain, and her voice in my ear, "This house was never yours." But what she didn't know? My father left behind a final truth. One she mocked, until it made her scream in court. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. The sky didn't cry for him. I did. I stood alone under a thinning black umbrella, rain drenching the hem of my dress and soaking my worn flats through to my skin. The wind cut sideways across the cemetery, pushing the scent of wet earth into my nose and mouth until it coated everything. My teeth, my throat, my grief. People gathered around my father's casket like they were just checking a box. A few held umbrellas, others didn't bother. The air buzzed with idle whispers, not mourning. I heard my name once, barely, then silence again. Valora stood tall at the head of the casket, dry under a sleek designer trench coat. Her voice, smooth and controlled, carried over the rustle of umbrellas and the pattering rain. Franklin was a man of discipline, of structure. He taught us about honor and hard work. Us? I almost said it aloud, but swallowed it like a stone. Her voice droned on, a string of polite half-truths. Not once did she mention the hours he spent helping me build a solar radio in 8th grade, or the way he always bought 2 slices of pie so I wouldn't have to choose. Not once did she say, Ivy, like I'd already been cut out of the family photo she planned to frame. People nodded. A few gave half smiles like they were congratulating her on a successful merger, not burying a husband. When the final handful of dirt was tossed, I lingered. My fingers gripped the edge of the umbrella tighter. I wasn't ready to let go. The last man who truly saw me, who remembered my real laugh before grief twisted it, was now beneath 6 feet of cold, wet soil. Eventually, the crowd began to trickle back toward the line of parked cars. The black parade moved on without me. I drifted back toward the house. His house. The only one I'd ever known as home. It felt smaller than I remembered, more like a set than a memory. The warmth I expected had gone with him. Inside, it still smelled like cinnamon and leather. My father's scent, fading already. I stepped into the den to grab the old family photo album and his pocket watch, the one he always wore to court, saying, "Time's a matter of dignity." It still ticked. Just as I slipped it into my coat pocket, Valora appeared in the hallway. She wasn't crying, not even close. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, her voice cool as a marble countertop. I turned, confused. I was just getting... She stepped forward, heels clicking on hardwood. "This house was never yours," she said flatly. "Pack what you can carry. You're out. Now." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for something in her face to soften. Nothing. "You're serious. You're 19. You have no claim." Franklin made sure of that. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." My legs moved before my brain could. I walked to my old room, which was already half cleared, like I'd just been a tenant she couldn't wait to evict. I packed 1 canvas tote, jeans, a sweater, the photo album. The pocket watch stayed in my coat. By the time I reached the front door, the rain had turned from drizzle to sheets. I turned once. She stood with her arms folded. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, you'll regret it." She didn't slam the door behind me. She closed it slowly, deliberately. The sound of the lock clicking might as well have been a gunshot. Outside, thunder cracked. It echoed across the street as I stepped off the porch, soaked to my bones, clutching everything I had left to my chest. People were still leaving the funeral. My Aunt Mara walked by without meeting my eyes. Her husband tugged her arm gently, steering her toward the car. "Poor girl," I heard someone mutter behind me. "She should have known better than to push that woman." Push her? I hadn't done a damn thing. Mr. Del Rey, my father's longtime lawyer, walked right past me like I was invisible. When I called out, "Mr. Del Rey?" he paused, opened his car door, and drove away. That's when it hit me. They all knew. Valora didn't act alone. This was a group decision, a quiet purge. No seat at the funeral, no room in the will, no voice. I walked 3 blocks until my legs gave up. I found a bus stop, sat on the bench and let the rain fall through the gaps in the plastic roof, soaking the back of my neck. The cold was sharp enough to cut through the fog in my chest. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket, unsure if it was rain or tears. I opened the tote to check what I'd grabbed, maybe a granola bar or phone charger. Instead, I found something I hadn't packed, a folded handkerchief. Navy blue, edged in white, embroidered with a single letter. D. I blinked. It was my dad's. I remembered it tucked in his suit pocket every Sunday, always crisp, always smelling faintly of cedar. I clutched it like a lifeline, like it could still smell like him, like it could still mean something. At that moment I thought it was just a handkerchief, just another goodbye, but I was wrong. I didn't know it yet, but that damp little handkerchief was holding something far heavier than rain. I clutched it like it was still warm from my father's coat pocket, though I knew it had been folded for weeks. The rain had slowed to a lazy drizzle by the time I reached the old bus depot where Aunt May had agreed, reluctantly, to pick me up. She pulled up in her creaky tan Buick, rolled down the window just enough, and nodded at the passenger seat. "You look like something the gutter coughed up," she muttered. "Get in before you catch pneumonia." We didn't hug. No words of comfort. Just the low hum of the heater and the smell of menthols on her jacket. The drive was quiet. I stared out the window as red and gold leaves clung to the sidewalks like forgotten promises. We didn't speak until she parked outside her row house on the edge of Baltimore. Brick, tired-looking, with a crooked porch swing that squeaked in the breeze. "You can stay in the basement. 2 weeks. That's all I can do." That was Aunt May. Practical. Not heartless. Just, well, not built for sentiment. She didn't ask about the funeral. She didn't mention Valora. She simply pointed me toward a narrow staircase that led into the musty dark beneath her home. The basement smelled like time. Damp concrete, old paint cans, a mildew-soaked carpet remnant covering half the floor. She flicked on a pull-chain light, revealing a cot with a wool blanket and a space heater beside it. "Bathroom's up the stairs. Kitchen closes at 10. Don't be banging around down here after midnight. I wake easy." "Thank you," I managed to whisper. May only gave a short nod, then disappeared upstairs. I peeled off my soaked jacket and sat on the edge of the cot. My shoes squelched when I towed them off. It was a strange relief to feel anything. Discomfort, chill, the scratch of the wool blanket against my palms. It meant I hadn't gone completely numb. I didn't sleep that first night. Instead, I wandered the shadows of the basement with my eyes, piecing together memories from the corners. An old piano bench sat under a canvas drape. I knew that bench. I was 12 the last time I sat there, hands trembling over keys I barely knew. My dad had clapped gently afterward, smiling like I'd just played Carnegie Hall. Valora had been there too, silent in the doorway, arms folded. Later that night, when I passed her in the kitchen, she leaned down and hissed, "Music doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. Try a mop next time." She always had a way of twisting joy into something sour. By the second evening, I had borrowed Aunt May's ancient tablet to check my email, figuring maybe someone, anyone, might have sent a condolence message. Most of the inbox was junk, promotions, old newsletters from school. But then I saw it. A message from my father, sent 3 weeks before he died. Subject, "Updated docs, talk soon." The body read, "Ivy, we'll talk after it's all finalized. Just know, I made sure you're protected this time. I'm sorry it took so long." There was nothing else, no attachment, no explanation, just that one cryptic line. I stared at the screen so long the battery died. The basement dimmed into black again, but the words stayed lit in my brain like neon. He had changed something. He had tried to protect me, but nothing had been read at the funeral except the standard copy of the will, Valora's name all over it. Mine? Not a single mention. It wasn't grief that took my breath then. It was doubt. The ugly kind. The kind that grows like mold in dark corners. Why wasn't his update read? The third night, I scrolled through my old draft folder on the tablet, half from boredom, half from a need to see a version of myself that hadn't yet been crushed, I found something. An unsent letter, dated 6 months ago. I must have written it one of those nights Valora slammed the bedroom door so hard the wall shook, or maybe the time she took my savings envelope and told me I owed her for rent. It read, "Dear Dad, if you really knew how she treated me when you weren't around, would you have left me alone with her? Would you have still gone on that business trip? Still married her? Would you have asked me to be kind to her, again and again, when she never once showed kindness back?" The letter ended there. No signature, just a blinking cursor that never moved again. I pressed my palm to my face and cried quietly, careful not to wake May. The tears weren't loud, but they soaked through the only pillow I had. And even though I was 20, in that moment, I felt younger than ever. There were too many gaps, too many questions, and deep down I knew Valora hadn't just shut the door on me that day, she'd locked it long ago, and now she was trying to erase the fact I ever lived behind it. The sky outside the basement window had turned a quiet charcoal gray. Rain tapped the glass in a slow, uneven rhythm, and I sat cross-legged on the creaky cot, still staring at the envelope in my hand. It was addressed to Mr. Kalins J. Marrow, with an extra S tacked onto my name and my father's first name misspelled. No return address, no indication of who sent it, just a thick government seal stamped across the front and one of those ugly green courthouse stamps in the corner. Inside was a folded legal document marked "Returned Invalid Power of Attorney." The ink was slightly smudged from moisture, but the message was clear. Valora had tried to file something, probably to claim authority she didn't have. But someone caught it and sent it here. I flipped the envelope over again. Maybe it was just clerical error, or maybe someone had meant for me to see it. Upstairs, I could hear Aunt May's slippers shuffle toward the kitchen. She'd been mumbling about a crossword puzzle when I'd come in. She didn't ask questions about what I brought with me, just tossed me a clean towel and pointed to the old washer if I needed it. "You've got 2 weeks," she'd said. "Then I expect you gone. I'm too old to play landlord." Fair. I slipped the letter into the pocket of my hoodie and climbed the stairs. May was stirring something on the stove that smelled like canned chili and onions. She glanced at me but said nothing. "Would you mind if I used the Wi-Fi for a bit?" I asked. "Need to check something." She waved a hand vaguely toward the hall. "Don't go downloading movies. My internet's slow as death." I grabbed the old tablet she let me borrow and curled up on the loveseat in the den. My fingers hovered over the screen. I opened a browser and typed Baltimore probate search into the search bar. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then 2 hours. The county's record system was sluggish, but eventually I started pulling up filings by date. I knew the week Dad had died and the name of the funeral home. That helped narrow it. Then, just before midnight, something caught my eye. An archived filing, never finalized, listed one Elias Croft as the original estate attorney. My breath caught. I clicked through. The entry had been updated just once, over a year ago, but the name was there, someone Valora clearly hadn't wanted me to find. I sat back, blinking at the screen. She told me there was no will, that Dad had taken care of things. But now, the memory hit hard. The night before the funeral, I'd asked her directly, standing in the hallway while she adjusted her diamond earring in the mirror. "What did he leave? Did he say anything about me?" She didn't even turn around. "Your father handled his affairs," she said. "You don't need to know what he left, because it wasn't you." Back then, I didn't have the strength to argue. I was still numb from the call, from seeing his body, from the awful silence in the house we once shared. But now I had a name. I scrawled it on a piece of receipt paper I found in May's junk drawer. Elias Croft. I copied down the old address listed on the court archive, somewhere near the courthouse. No phone listed, no email. I tried searching for his name directly. A few hits came up. An old website that hadn't been updated since 2016, a few news clippings about elder law seminars. When I dialed the number on the site, I got a flat beep and a robotic voice. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I stared at the wall. The peeling wallpaper above May's heater was a faded peach color, curling at the edges from years of steam. Somewhere outside, a siren passed by, distant and fast. I didn't have money, I didn't have a car, but I had his name now, and sometimes that was enough. The next morning, after a night of half sleep and too many thoughts, I got dressed quietly, wrapped the address in a plastic sandwich bag to protect it from the rain, and walked the 4 blocks to the nearest bus stop. May didn't ask where I was going. Downtown Baltimore always felt like a city trying to remember itself. Buildings leaned tired against each other, and the wind near the courthouse carried that cold dampness that stuck to your bones. I clutched the bus pole and checked my notes one more time. The clerk at the courthouse looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I approached slowly. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm trying to locate a former estate attorney who used to handle filings here. Elias Croft?" Her brows barely moved. "We don't give out personal details. Privacy policy." "I understand," I said, "but his name came up in an incomplete record tied to my father's estate. I'm not asking for much, just a confirmation if he ever worked here. Please." She sighed, typing reluctantly. Croft. I waited. After a few seconds, she nodded. "He filed with us for years. Last activity was almost 3 years ago. Retired, far as we know. Left no forwarding contact." "Nothing?" She eyed me a moment, then softened, just a little. "Look, if he ever practiced private law, maybe he filed with the state bar. They don't purge names right away. Try that." "Thank you." Back at May's, I stared at the address again. It was a long shot, but I didn't need to find his entire biography. I just needed him to open the door. That night, as the wind picked up and rain scratched at the window pane again, I sat on the basement cot and opened my journal. I flipped past the unsent letter to Dad and turned to a blank page. "You tried to disappear him, Valora," I whispered, gripping the pen, "but I'm still here." I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning broke slow and gray, clouds hanging low like they didn't want to leave either. Aunt May had gone off to her quilting circle, leaving me alone in the basement with a mug of bitter coffee and my thoughts bouncing off the damp concrete walls. I spread out the contents of the envelope from the courthouse one more time, just to make sure I hadn't dreamed it. That misdirected mail, with my father's name spelled Harold, had bounced back from a filing Valora must have made. It had been rejected. "Invalid power of attorney," the stamp had read, and under that mess, one line, small, almost missed, held a name, Elias Croft. No phone number, just an address. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a map, but I had a name, a bus schedule, and the burning ache of every memory Valora had tried to shove into a ditch and forget. And that was enough. It took 2 buses and a long walk in boots that hadn't been meant for mud. His house sat off a quiet county road, tucked behind a canopy of ancient oaks, their limbs tangled like old hands protecting something they'd sworn to keep hidden. I stood there in the drizzle for a minute, not ready to knock yet. The siding was faded, ivy strangling the front steps, but the windows were clean. That's how I knew someone still lived there. When I finally made it to the door and lifted my hand, I hesitated. Then I knocked. The man who opened looked like life had carved every line on his face with purpose. His shoulders hunched slightly, leaning on a cane, but his eyes, clear, not confused, not cloudy, sharp as the sound of the latch when he opened the door halfway. "Mr. Croft?" I asked, voice cracking from cold and nerves. He looked me over like he'd seen too many people he didn't trust anymore. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Ivy, Harold's daughter." He didn't open the door further, but his jaw twitched. The name hit him like it had weight. "Harold," he repeated. "A quiet man, came alone, always paid in cash, wore that same navy coat even when it wasn't cold." I nodded, clutching the envelope to my chest. He opened the door all the way. "Come in before you catch pneumonia." The warmth inside was almost startling. It smelled like lemon polish and chamomile. Bookshelves lined the walls, law journals, some dusty photo frames. I stepped inside, grateful, but cautious. I found your name on a bounced filing, I explained. From the courthouse. He raised a brow. Was it Valora? I froze. His eyes didn't leave mine. She came by, he said, motioning me to sit. A few weeks before the funeral. He moved slowly, setting the kettle on the stove like it was habit more than hospitality. When he finally eased himself into the chair across from me with 2 mugs, I took the one he slid forward. My hands shook. She said Harold wanted to update his will, he said flatly. Said he wanted to streamline things, remove unnecessary names, unreliable beneficiaries. That was her phrase. I didn't blink. And you believed her? He scoffed. No. I asked where Harold was. She said he was sick, too sick to come. I told her I'd need to hear that from him directly. He looked at me then, not lawyer to client, but man to woman who's been carrying too much for too long. She got angry, told me I was outdated, said, and I quote, "I'll get what I need with or without your help, Elias." Then she stormed out. I swallowed hard. Did my dad ever talk to you after that? Elias leaned back, eyes dimming a little. No, never heard from him again. Next thing I know, his obituary's in the paper. The funeral came and went. I wasn't invited. He turned and opened a drawer from the table beside him, pulled out a manila folder, yellowed at the edges but neatly labeled. I don't know what's been filed since, but this, he said, tapping the folder, is the last valid will I ever handled for Harold. He handed it to me. The weight of it hit my lap like a stone. My name was there, right there in black ink. Ivy Jo Wren. I didn't cry. Elias watched me carefully. You need to be careful now, he said quietly. They bury more than people, Ms. Wren. They bury names. They bury stories. And sometimes they bury the truth so deep, it chokes on dirt before anyone finds it. I nodded slowly, fingers gripping the folder tight. As I stepped back into the gray afternoon, light rain brushed my shoulders again, softer this time, like a warning, not a punishment. I looked at the trees, at the winding road ahead, and at the folder pressed against my chest like armor. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a lawyer, but now I had the truth, and a name they hadn't expected me to remember. Original will in hand, I didn't realize just how dangerous the next step would be. But as I stepped off that city bus and onto the cracked sidewalk near Aunt May's little house, something in my chest shifted. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was sharp. Like something inside me had finally woken up after years of silence. The porch creaked under my boots. She opened the door before I knocked. Aunt May had always had that sixth sense, the kind you don't learn. It's just there, baked into the bones of women who've lived long enough to stop apologizing. I saw the news, she said softly. Valora's speech at the memorial. That snake can cry on command, I swear. I stepped inside, and the scent of cinnamon and old wood met me like a blanket. Her kitchen hadn't changed since I was 12. Same checkered curtains, same dented kettle whistling faintly on the back burner. I laid the will on the table between us. She adjusted her glasses slowly, squinting. You sure this is real? She asked. Elias Croft gave it to me, I said. He said it's the last one he had on file, before she tried to force him to draft another. May let out a breath and sat down across from me. Your daddy came to me that summer, she said after a pause. He was uneasy, said he was worried about how persuasive Valora could be when she wanted something. She reached over to the drawer by the fridge, pulled out a manila envelope and laid it down. Inside was a receipt from a mobile notary, a name circled in red ink, Lance Carwell. He notarized something for Valora a week before the funeral, May said. But here's the thing, his license was revoked 3 years ago. Fraud. My stomach clenched. You think she bribed him? May's eyes didn't blink. Or worse, that woman doesn't ask, she corners. Silence settled like dust in the air. I stared at the name on that yellowing receipt and realized Valora didn't just plan to push me out, she'd spent years planting seeds, covering her tracks. I spent the afternoon with May, sipping lukewarm coffee, retracing legal names and gaps in timelines. She offered to come with me to the house, but I shook my head. I needed to face it alone. By early evening, I stood once again in the driveway of the place that used to be mine. The house looked smaller now, less threatening, just drywall and secrets, stitched together with bad paint and forced smiles. I let myself in with the emergency key Valora probably forgot existed, hidden behind the old brick near the back porch. I moved quickly, quiet. Told myself I was only here to grab a sweater I'd forgotten in the guest room. But the guest room wasn't a guest room anymore. My old bedroom, the one with the window facing the lilac tree, was gutted. Trophies? Gone. Books? Vanished. Even the carpet was stripped bare, like they'd tried to erase me from the walls. Still, one thing remained. Above the desk, a frame hung crooked on a nail. A picture of Dad, me, and the scruffy golden retriever we rescued when I was 8. The glass was cracked, the photo slightly curled. I reached up and pulled it down. Behind the photo, tucked between cardboard and wood backing, was a folded piece of paper. My hands went cold. I unfolded it slowly, breath tight in my throat. Ivy, this is for you. I sat down on the floor as if my knees gave out. It wasn't a will. It wasn't notarized. It was something deeper. His handwriting was jagged, rushed, but I knew every stroke. If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect you from her. I tried. God knows I tried. But she's cunning. I've made arrangements. Elias will understand when you bring him what's hidden in the church box. I left it where you used to sit on Sundays, when you thought I wasn't watching. I always was. I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest. All the air seemed to leave the room. All the anger, all the grief. It quieted for a moment into something more dangerous. Focus. He knew. He'd seen what she was. I stood, refolded the letter, and slipped it into my coat pocket. As I left the room, I heard it again. Valora's voice, the day she kicked me out. This house was never yours. You were just borrowed. But this time, I didn't flinch. I turned back one last time and said out loud, "You're right. It's not mine. But the truth is, I didn't sleep that night, not after realizing what my father had hidden in the church box. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his handwriting, heard his voice, felt the weight of a truth he'd buried, trusting I'd be strong enough to find it. By sunrise, I was already dressed, driving down that winding rural road with headlights cutting through the mist. The old church sat tucked behind a grove of ash trees, their branches arching like a canopy over the gravel path. It was the place where Dad taught Sunday school, where he built benches with his own hands, where, even after Valora rolled her eyes, he still brought me every Christmas Eve without fail. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. It smelled of beeswax and cedar. Faint light spilled through the stained glass windows, casting broken colors on the hardwood floor. I walked slowly, heart thudding, until I reached the altar. Behind it, half hidden beneath the edge of the pulpit, was the old offering box. He built it when I was 12. I remembered how proud he looked the day he finished it, running his hand across the polished oak like it was sacred. He'd carved a small cross into the top, just above the keyhole. I knelt down and felt around the base. The latch was there, just as he'd described in the letter, tucked behind a loose slat of molding. It clicked with a soft resistance. I opened the compartment slowly. Inside sat a thick envelope sealed in wax. My name was scrawled across the front. Ivy, final revision, for your hands only. HB, notarized by Father Thomas. My hands trembled. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at it. This wasn't just a letter. This could be the very thing Valora worked so hard to erase. Back in my car, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the little blue house at the end of Maple Ridge, where Elias lived now, tucked away from everything. The man was in his 70s, but his mind was sharper than any blade Valora ever tried to wield. He opened the door in his slippers. His eyes scanned my face, and without a word, he stepped aside. I laid the envelope on his kitchen table, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. He didn't say anything at first, just peeled back the wax carefully, slid the document out, and adjusted his glasses. Then he exhaled, slow and low. "This is it," he said. "This is the real one." He flipped through the pages, pausing at the signature, his brow furrowed. Notarized. Father Thomas, witnessed, dated 3 weeks after the version Valora filed. "And?" I asked, even though my chest already knew. "She's not in it, not a word. Everything, your father's land, his business shares, even his personal letters, goes to you." It landed on me like a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying, not because of money, not even because of the house, but because for the first time I had proof. Proof that he hadn't left me behind, proof that I wasn't crazy. I leaned back in the chair, trying to breathe through it. Elias placed a hand on mine. "Ivy, this changes everything. But we need to be careful. If we go in guns blazing, she'll twist it. We need to file this through the right channels." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. "Do you want revenge?" he asked gently. "Or do you want victory?" I didn't answer right away. Outside the window, storm clouds rolled in, thick and slow, the same kind that hung in the sky the day Valora slammed that door in my face after the funeral. She said I didn't belong. She called me a guest in my own father's home. She paraded herself at his memorial like she'd loved him. I stood, quietly, letting the weight of it all fall into place. "No," I finally said. "I don't want revenge." Elias tilted his head. "I want every lie she's told to die in daylight," I added, "with signatures, with dates, with my name printed across every page." He nodded once. "Then we'll start the filing today." We spent the next few hours scanning and making certified copies. Elias reached out to a contact at probate court, someone he trusted. Every step was documented, time-stamped, clean. There would be no shouting, no scenes, just evidence. But before I left, I pulled a notepad from my bag and sat down again at the table. I wrote a letter, not to Valora, but to the court. A simple statement of discovery, including my legal claim, attached with a copy of the will and Elias's witness certification. When I signed my name at the bottom, my hand no longer shook. I slid the letter into an envelope and sealed it. Back in the car, I stared at the document resting on the passenger seat beside me. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for once, it was mine. As I turned onto the highway, I whispered to myself, "She thought I was powerless, but she forgot. I'm Harold Bishop's daughter." The next morning, Valora found an envelope taped to her gate, with 2 words written on it: "Discovery filed." I didn't stick around to see Valora's reaction that morning. I just watched from a parked car across the street as she yanked the envelope off her gate and nearly tore it in two. Her shoulders stiffened, her head turned left, then right, scanning the street like a predator who just realized she'd been tracked. But I wasn't hiding anymore. By 8:45 a.m., I stood on the courthouse steps with Elias beside me. He looked like someone had dragged him out of retirement and dropped him into a fire, but the glint in his eyes told me he wouldn't be anywhere else. "She'll show up late," he muttered. "Valora always needs an entrance." Inside, the courtroom smelled of wood polish and cold ambition. A few reporters from the local paper were already scribbling notes. Some of the pews were filled with familiar faces. Neighbors, former churchgoers, folks who'd once called me that sweet little bishop girl. Valora didn't disappoint. She burst through the doors at exactly 9:02, wearing an elegant black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with a silk scarf tied dramatically at her neck. Her heels clacked loud against the tile floor. She didn't glance at me, just made a beeline for the judge's bench like she owned the room. "Your Honor," she said too loudly, setting a thick file down with a self-satisfied grin. "Before we begin, I'd like to present new information regarding Miss Bishop's emotional stability." Judge Ramirez, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, gave her a nod to proceed. Valora flipped the file open. "This is a psychiatric evaluation. conducted 6 months ago. It shows that Ivy Bishop was placed under suicide watch for 36 hours, diagnosed with severe emotional instability. Clearly, she is not fit to manage any estate, let alone my late husband's. There were audible gasps. A few pens stopped moving. My stomach didn't drop. Not this time. I stood slowly. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Judge Ramirez nodded again. I reached into my bag and handed Elias a flash drive. He walked it over to the court technician. A screen behind the bench flickered on. "This is security footage from St. Joseph's Church," I said calmly, "taken the day after my father's death." The room quieted like someone had pulled the oxygen out of it. The video played, grainy but clear. It showed Valora entering my father's private office through a back door. She didn't knock, she used a key. Her coat, her shoes, her posture, undeniably her. The timestamp glared in the corner of the screen, 11:23 a.m., the day after Harold Bishop's funeral. "She told the court she hadn't entered the office since my father passed," I said, voice steady. "But this video proves otherwise. She had access, she had motive, she had opportunity. And shortly after this footage, my father's will was amended." The screen went black. Judge Ramirez leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "Miss Valora Bishop," he said slowly, "if this footage is authenticated, and I see no reason to doubt it, we may be looking at will tampering. That is a felony offense. Are you prepared to explain this to the court?" Valora's face drained of color, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed, just once. "Oh, come on," she said, feigning exasperation. "You're taking her seriously now? The woman was under suicide watch, for God's sake. What are we doing here? Believing every scorned daughter who walks in with a home video?" Judge Ramirez banged his gavel once, sharply. "This court will decide what is credible and what is not. Until then, refrain from character attacks, Mrs. Bishop." Mrs. Bishop. That title stung in my ears more than I expected. As the session recessed for evidence verification, Valora brushed past me near the hallway. Her breath was cold. "You just made yourself a target, sweetheart," she whispered, her smile small and full of venom. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. Elias placed a hand lightly on my shoulder once she walked away. "She's not going to go down quietly," he said, voice low. "You've cornered her. That's when people like her get unpredictable." I met his gaze. "I've lived with fear long enough," I said. "It's her turn now." We stepped outside just as the clouds rolled in, gray and heavy, just like the day Valora had shut the front door in my face and told me to disappear. But I was done disappearing. That evening, after stopping by the diner for a takeout sandwich, I returned to my apartment just past 7 p.m. The hallway light was out, which wasn't unusual. Maintenance had been slow lately. But when I turned the key in the lock, I knew something was wrong. The door was unlocked. Inside, nothing was stolen. Not my laptop, not the cash I'd left in the drawer, but the shoebox under my bed, the one with Dad's old letters, cards, sermon notes, was gone. Every last trace of his handwriting vanished, and on the floor by the window, I found one thing: a silk scarf, the same one Valora had worn to court. By the time I got back to the motel, the doorframe of my old apartment was splintered, and the lock barely hung on. Inside, the drawers were yanked open, files shredded, even the floorboards pried up near the old desk. Whoever did this wasn't just looking for valuables. They were looking for something specific, and they found it. The letters, my father's handwriting, his real thoughts, gone. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, clutching my purse tighter than ever. It was the only thing I had kept with me constantly, and inside it was one last card I hadn't played. Morning came too quickly. Fog hovered low over the courthouse steps as I stood in front of the building one more time. Elias met me at the corner, wearing a tired gray suit and holding 2 coffees. "You okay?" he asked, gently passing one to me. "No," I said, "but I'm ready." We entered through security, and I could already hear murmurs from the hallway. Local reporters huddled near the wall, cameras off, but ears sharp. Valora had made this whole mess into a circus, and she was the ringleader. I kept my eyes forward as we stepped into the courtroom. Judge Ramirez glanced up from her bench, nodding curtly. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Valora strutted in moments later, dressed head to toe in a mourning black gown with lace cuffs and an oversized hat. I almost laughed. She looked like someone trying to win a costume contest for Grieving Widow. But beneath the mascara and fake sorrow, there was tension in her shoulders. She felt it coming. When the court was called to order, I waited until the opening statements were done. And then, quietly, without flourish, I stood, walked to the clerk's desk, and handed over a small cream envelope. Inside was a scanned copy of a deed. Not just any deed. It had come from the First Lincoln Bank's safety deposit box. My name was there, my father's signature, dated a full year before he died, notarized, witnessed. To my daughter Ivy, it read, so she always knows this home is hers. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Ramirez leaned forward slightly, her mouth tightening. "I'd like to call a witness," I said calmly. "Mr. Howard from First Lincoln Bank." An older gentleman rose from the benches behind us, slightly stooped, wire-rimmed glasses, but firm in voice. "I personally managed Mr. Harold Bishop's safety deposit access," he began. "He visited in April of last year with this exact document. I notarized it myself. I remember because he was very specific about wanting it to be protected in case of confusion." Valora shot up so fast her chair skidded backward. "That's impossible!" she shrieked. "He told me it was mine. The house was supposed to be mine." I stood slowly, keeping my eyes on hers. Her chest rose and fell in panicked rhythm. "No, Valora," I said. "He never said that to you. You just told yourself that over and over until you believed your own lie." She stumbled a step forward. "You're lying! You must have faked this. He wouldn't do this to me." Elias leaned over and whispered to the judge, placing a second document in front of her. Judge Ramirez lifted her gavel, her voice like stone. "Enough! I've reviewed both the deed and the testimony. The court rules that the contested will is invalid. The original transfer of property to Miss Bishop stands. Executor Valora Simmons will be investigated for fraud." The gavel slammed down. Valora's knees buckled. She collapsed into the chair beside her attorney, mascara streaking her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just a broken whisper. "This isn't real. She wasn't supposed to win. She was supposed to be gone." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked out. The courthouse hallway was quiet. Reporters scribbled fast. I could feel the heat of the cameras, but I kept walking. Outside, the sun had finally pushed through the morning haze. I stepped out into the light, my shoes clicking softly against the stone walkway. As I reached the bench near the exit, I paused. Slowly, I opened my purse and took out something I hadn't touched in years. A folded white handkerchief. Soft, embroidered with a tiny blue daisy in one corner. My father gave it to me when I was 15. After I stood up for myself at school and came home bruised and quiet. "For the times you need to be strong," he had said, "even if no one else sees it." I placed it gently on the courthouse bench, not for anyone else to pick up, just to leave something behind, a memory, a marker, a promise, for the girl I was, and the woman I became. The courtroom had gone quiet by the time I stepped out into the light drizzle. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slowly escaped me. Justice was done. But peace? That would take a little longer. Weeks passed before I went back. Not because I was afraid, not even out of resentment. Just, I needed time. Time to know that returning wouldn't feel like walking into a haunted shell, that I wouldn't expect to see Valora's shadow every time I turned a corner. I needed to walk in as Ivy Bishop, the woman who stood her ground, not the girl who had been thrown out like trash. The clouds had scattered that morning. No thunder, no drama. Just the kind of quiet sky that makes you feel like the world has finally taken a deep breath. I pulled into the driveway, mine now, and sat in the car for a full minute, hands resting on the steering wheel. Then I reached for the key. My key. It clicked in the lock smoother than I expected, like the door had just been waiting. Inside, the smell was faintly familiar, cleaner maybe, but still home in some distant way. The carpet had been vacuumed, but if I squinted, I could still trace the faded imprint of where my father's shoes once rested. I walked slow, letting the space reintroduce itself to me. The hallway was quieter than I remembered, but on the far wall, above the dusty baseboard heater, a single photo still hung crooked. My breath caught. It was me and Dad. I must have been 9 or 10. We were at Lake Avery, holding up a fish that was too small to keep but too proud not to photograph. His arm was around me, his smile wide, mine toothless. I reached up, straightened the frame gently. "He never stopped choosing me," I murmured. "He just didn't know how to say it loud enough before he left." The kitchen was emptier than it used to be. Valora had moved out under court order. No dishes in the sink, no scented candles hiding resentment. But on the counter, neatly tucked under a coaster, sat an envelope. My name was scrawled in that sharp, slanted handwriting I knew too well. Ivy. Inside, the house deed. And a note. "You won. But I'm not sorry. I did what I thought was best. For me." There was no apology, no remorse, just another chapter of Valora being Valora. I folded the paper, walked over to the fireplace, and tossed it into the crackling flame I'd lit just an hour ago. It curled and blackened quickly, the flames licking up her final words like they were nothing. Some things don't deserve to be kept. I was wiping my hands on a dish towel when the knock came. Light, hesitant. At the door stood a boy, maybe 15, skinny as a fence post, soaked hoodie clinging to his arms. He held out a small brown box, the kind couriers use for express delivery. His sneakers were torn near the toes, his jeans damp and clinging to his shins. "Package for Ivy Bishop?" "That's me." I took it gently. "You all right, kid? You're soaked." He shrugged. "I've had worse." His voice cracked slightly. "Hang on." I ducked into the hall closet, pulled out an old towel and a pair of thick socks. My dad's, still folded like he might come back for them one day. I handed them over. "You don't have to." "No one should be out in this rain with cold feet and no kindness." He looked at me, surprised, then gave a small nod. "Thanks, ma'am." As he walked down the path, I heard him whisper, "Probably not meant for me." She reminds me of someone my mom used to talk about. I stood there for a long moment, box still in hand. When I finally opened it, there was nothing urgent inside, just a few estate papers sent late. But something about the way it arrived felt like a full circle. Later that afternoon, I went up to the attic, drawn by something I couldn't name. I hadn't been up there since I was 16. The light was dim, dust swirling in the air like old secrets. In the corner, under a canvas tarp, I found a wooden box I hadn't seen in years. The lock was broken. Inside, 2 handkerchiefs, one I recognized immediately. The other had something stitched in delicate navy thread. KB. A note rested beneath them, yellowed, the ink faded but steady. "Keep one, leave the other, so you'll never forget who you are." I brought them both down to the kitchen and placed them side by side on the windowsill, right where the morning light poured in best. That evening, I stepped out into the backyard. My father's garden, once so carefully tended, was now a tangle of green and brown, wild and unapologetic. But in the corner, near the fence, the violets still bloomed. I knelt beside them, let my fingers trace the edges of the petals. "You always said the soil remembers," I whispered. "So do I." The sun dipped low, casting a golden hush over everything. Some things return in silence, roots, names, and the dignity no one can take.